Starting from the beginning, just how I even got into space in general, that started really early. I always thought the idea of being an astronaut or a rocket scientist would be really cool, like most kids. But I think the thing that sort of made the difference between, having that childhood goal and then going to something a little more realistic was my parents. They really pushed us that, no matter how random or, how extreme our goals were, that they were going to support us. For example, I was interested in meteorology at one point, and my parents sent me to weather camp, which is a real thing that exists, but just goes to show that, they really supported our goals. So coming out of college, my first job, as you mentioned, was at Intelsat. And what really got me interested in that was, the nature of the work. So when I worked at Intelsat, I was doing payload engineering. And so this was payload engineering for satellites that were already in space and had launched. So the idea of just, flying a satellite that's in space just seemed like a very cool thing to me, and a very exciting opportunity for me. And I do think it was a really great place to start. A lot of people use the idea of driving a car when they talk about, satellite engineering. If you want to, work for Ford and design cars, it really helps if you actually know how to drive a car and have had that experience. And so, to use that analogy, what I found in my career, and you'll see it, as I talk about how I've gone through, these different companies and where I've worked, the general theme is that, I get interested in something and then I start asking more questions to sort of get to the bottom of it. So, I start with the big picture, as I call it, the big picture of satellites, which is the results that we get from them, the data that we get from them, the science data that we get from them, et cetera. And so essentially, I started there, working on the actual payload, which is the actual instrument that gives us, data and gives us what we need. And I got interested, the same way you might if you're driving your kind and you're wondering, well, why does my radio user interface work this way? Why do I have these constraints, when I'm trying to change gears and, kind of wondering, if I can improve on the process, but first knowing that I need to know more about what went into those design decisions. So from Intelsat, that's what actually led me to go to work at Orbital ATK. So the difference between Intelsat and Orbital ATK was that, at Intelsat, we were essentially receiving a satellite from a satellite manufacturer. When I was at Orbital ATK, we were actually designing and building these satellites. And so I was still in, mission operations, but I was sort of at that lower level where I got to make a few more of those decisions and understand, how my concept of operations might affect the person who's actually, flying and using the satellite. And then, as it always happens, as I was working in mission operations, I'm working with, different subsystem engineers and, systems leads, because, their design really plays into, what I'm doing, and, how we actually, fly the satellite, make our user manuals. So that sort of led me to want to dig a little deeper and, see from a systems perspective, from the design systems perspective, what that looks like. And that's what led me to General Atomics. And at General Atomics, my formal title was that I was, a mission operations lead engineer, but our team was extremely small. And what happens, when you have a very small team is that essentially everybody, has to pull their own weight. And regardless of what your title is, you've got to contribute to whatever cause or subsystem that you need to. So I was able to take a really active role there in mission operations. I was actually only a mission operations engineer there when I was working on those programs. And it wasn't until, much later that we actually brought someone else in. So I really got to be in the design phases and, see from the beginning of a program, from the requirements phase, how you work to design a solution that works, and how it all wraps together nicely, when you launch and fly the instrument. And so then, of course, as I said, similar theme, I'm working, very closely with some subsystem engineers when I was at General Atomics. And at that point, I wanted to know, well, what's going into their assumptions, at the lowest level, a power system or a telecom system, what's going into, what are they considering? What are the traits that they're doing that are affecting me, further up in the systems level? And that is what led me to Ball Aerospace. So, when I started here, before I started here at Ball, when I interviewed, I basically interviewed with every single subsystem. And I was lucky enough to get to pick which one that I wanted to work in. And I actually picked the one that I knew the least about, which is the power systems subsystem, which I'm in right now. And the reason that I did that is because I've noticed this trend in my career of, constantly asking more questions and trying to, constantly learn more knowledge. And I felt like if I started, where I knew the least, as opposed to, where I felt more comfortable, that would be a really good opportunity for me to sort of quench that knowledge thirst that I'm constantly having. So that's what has led me here to Ball Aerospace, which has been very rewarding. And, honestly, it's really good for Ball because I think I'm at the lowest level that I can go to. So I plan to be here quite a while. So yeah, I think that's sort of what has led me to progress through my career. I think it's really two things, when I look back and think about it. I think the first one has absolutely been mentorship. And I mentioned in my acceptance speech for this award that, the thing that made the difference for me as far as, being successful in my career and having these opportunities is that I have had excellent mentors at every company that I've worked at. And I do feel, quite lucky to have had that experience. And, it's part luck. And then I think it's part, actually me going out and trying to get those mentors and being active about it. I was, one of the number one priorities when I started my first job was to talk to as many people as I could and be very deliberate about finding mentors as early as I could from day one. And the other thing that, with regards to mentorship that was important is, I think when people think about mentorship, they think about, there's just one person who's your mentor and, they're guiding you through your career path, your whole life. And if you can find that, I think that's amazing. But for me, I think it's important to have multiple mentors for multiple different things that you need. If I think about the mentors that I have, just right now at Ball Aerospace, I've got 3 different mentors. I've got one mentor who works in my group and helps me from a technical perspective to make sure I'm excelling technically. I have another mentor who's actually on the executive team at Ball. And those mentorship conversations are more about my career goals and how do I work my career path and make sure I'm taking the right opportunities so, I get where I want to be in the long run. And then I have a third mentor who actually works in our diversity and inclusion department. And those conversations are, the work that I, do at Ball, working for our different resource groups, ensuring that work is going well. And then also just, minority to minority, how are you feeling? How are things going? Do you have any questions or concerns? That's a whole nother mentor that I have. So I think that's important. And then I think the last thing I'll say about mentorship is I think a lot of people think about very formal mentors when they talk about mentorship. But the thing that I've also been, very deliberate about is figuring out who's good at what, regardless of whether they're your formal mentor. So one of the things that I've done at every company that I've worked at, and it might sound a little weird, is that I have a list and it's an actual written down list on paper. And what it is it's all these different skills. It could be someone who's really good at Visio, somebody who's really good at MATLAB, somebody who's got a really great electrical engineering background. And next to each one of those different skills is a name. And as I work at a company, I just fill out, the more that I talk to people, the more that I learn from them, who's good at what. And the reason that I do that is because there's been quite a few times in my career where, I get assigned to a project and I might not even really know where to start. But I do know what skills I'm going to need to accomplish that task. And so having that list is extremely important. And then I think the second thing that has really helped me in my career has been not saying no to any opportunity. And that can get a little tricky. You don't want to get in a situation, where you're overwhelmed with work, and I have to be cognizant of that. But I've been very deliberate about, any opportunity that I get, even, when I hear it initially, there's that initial shock and concern about, can I do this? Is to just take it. And an example I can give is, when I worked at Orbital ATK, I was there for maybe 6 months. And I got asked to fly out to Europe to train one of our customers on how to operate the satellite that we would be delivering to them and that would be launching fairly soon. And this is while I'm still getting up to speed on just working there, how we do design in general, the subsystems, after coming from, a payload engineering background. And I took the opportunity. And was not just because it was a free trip to Europe, even though that was definitely an incentive. But yeah, I took the opportunity because I felt like, number one, this is a fast track. I'm starting out in this job, and this is an opportunity that's going to force me to learn as much information as possible. And so, it wasn't easy. I certainly spent several nights working, till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, just making sure that I was prepared and making sure that, I felt like I could explain things well and that the procedures, looked good and things like that. And it worked out. The customer was impressed, my colleagues were impressed, and I gained a lot of trust from my colleagues very early on at that job because of taking that opportunity and being successful in it. And then, of course, after, you gain trust, what happens, people offer you more opportunities. So shortly after that, people were asking if I wanted to, be a mission ops lead on a program, after I hadn't really been there that long. So I think that has really helped, just gaining trust from everyone and not saying no. People come to me when they need things. And I think that just helps me get all these really cool opportunities that I've had. There's many things, but I'll just pick one. I think one of the things that, I'll talk to you, especially because I think it's just not something, it's something I had to learn by experience. And it's not something you can really read in a career book or prep for. And I think that's the importance of authenticity at work and in your work. And what I mean by that is, I had the assumption when I first started in my career that it was not okay or appropriate to, bring your full self to work and be authentic at work. And to give an example, before I started at my first job, I took this professional etiquette class. And basically you learn different things like how to do a good handshake, how to behave at, a work dinner or, a happy hour, things like that. And one of the questions that I asked them is, because I'm a member of the LGBT community, I'm in a same-sex relationship. How and should I introduce my partners when I'm at a happy hour or a holiday party? And the advice that I got was, you should probably just introduce them as your friend, which, of course, terrible advice. I know that now, but I did not know that then, that was not correct advice. And so the reason that, something that seems fairly, simple, inviting, talking about your partner, or, bringing them, with you to a work event, is so important is, we talk a lot about work from a professional and technical standpoint. But we spend a lot of time talking to our coworkers about a lot of things that aren't work. We talk about, what we're doing over the weekend and our families, and especially now that, we're kind of in each other's homes after the pandemic. There's essentially a lot that we talk to them about, and those connections that we form when we talk about those things are very important for networking and for building team relationships. And so what I found, from unfortunately using that advice is, at my first job, I was not out to my coworkers. And, when we would have certain work events or happy hours, a lot of times I just wouldn't go because, people are bringing their husbands and their wives and things like that, which is really unfortunate because I missed some of those networking opportunities and opportunities to get to know them better. So I think that is very important, and it's something that I had to learn and work through. I had to work through it from the perspective of my sexuality. I've had to work through that from the perspective of my race and code switching. And I think the other part about authenticity is even just authenticity in what you do and don't know. I think it's important for us to be authentic about, this is not my area of expertise. I need to go out and seek out those resources, as opposed to doing work and, not wanting to bother anyone, not wanting to ask stupid questions, and sort of letting your ego get in the way of that. I think it's important to be authentic in that as well. And I think there's a lot of different ways, bringing yourself to work, what that means to different people. But I think it's something everybody can take away because it makes your experience so much better. Now, just feeling like I can bring myself to work has dramatically improved my work quality. So that's what I wish I had known. I think number one, I feel a responsibility as somebody who has been successful, to make it easier for other people. Especially, if you look back 10 years, somebody who looked like me definitely had it worse than I have it now. But even now, a lot of times I'm the only person who looks like me in a room. And so if I can make that experience easier for other people, by giving them mentorship and preparing them for work and making sure that they, feel comfortable even applying to an aerospace job or even majoring in aerospace engineering, which, traditionally, you hear it's only for the smartest people ever. I think that is sort of my responsibility because people have done it for me before, number one. Number two, just from a practical perspective, I think if all of us had mentors, if we all valued mentorship and made it a priority, I honestly think that all of our jobs would be easier. You think about some of the issues that we see. People are struggling to, hire diverse talent or get people up to speed when they start, at a job, either fresh out of college or even just coming from a different career path. Imagine if mentorship was key in that situation, how much easier it would be for us to do our jobs. If you're in a meeting and we're trying to solve something, well, now we've got the right people in the room because we've done the work to make sure that those people feel comfortable to be here and that they're prepared to be here. And they feel like they have a path, in this career. So, for the practical standpoint, I think it's quite useful. And then lastly, I am very busy, but I think as far as scheduling and things like that, to me, scheduling is all about managing priorities. Mentorship is a priority to me. It's one of my top priorities. And so it doesn't feel like, a chore or, something that I have to do just because, or something that I'm being forced to do. I legitimately enjoy it, especially when that mentorship is, talking to people about what I do, about my career path, about all the cool things going on in the space industry. I'm a true space nerd. If we talk about free time, in my true free time, when I'm sitting on the couch, I'm usually just watching YouTube documentaries about space and the cosmos and astronomy and things like that. So to have the opportunity to, nerd out with someone and talk to them about it, I think it's really exciting. One of my friends reached out to me recently. His nephew's like 6 years old, and his birthday is coming up, and he was saying, oh, he's really interested in space. Can you find some space toys for him? And I said, yeah. I gave him a list of toys. But the other thing I said is, we could set up a Zoom call and I could just talk to him about what I do. I know he's 6 years old and he might change his mind a year from now about what he's interested in, but it would be fun to talk to a little kid about space. It's really exciting to talk about the things you're passionate about. So I think that's why it's been really easy for me to carve out the time. I think one of the biggest lessons that I've learned has been that confidence is key. And confidence, very different, to be clear, from arrogance or, thinking that you know more than you do. But yeah, when we think about confidence and how important it is, when I started out in my career, I kind of had this assumption that, when you're starting out in, the first few days, weeks of your first job, you're not really valuable to the company is what I assumed. You don't know anything and you can't really bring anything to the table. When I started at Intelsat, I was working with people who had been in this industry longer than I have literally been alive. And so that can be a little startling. And you feel like when you're in meetings, you're just there to sit and listen and maybe do some busy work for people. And then, years down the line, you'll become useful. And then at that point, you can speak up in a room and you can give input. And the reason I realized that is because what happened was I was in certain meetings and we might be troubleshooting an issue. And, some of the more senior folks are, throwing out ideas and I'm just sitting there listening. And I have my own ideas about maybe, how we could approach certain problems, certain solutions. But I didn't really feel comfortable actually saying anything about it. I didn't want to say something that made me sound stupid. Where maybe, somebody's going to question why I'm in this room in the first place. But, maybe later on, not even that day, maybe the next meeting, someone will say exactly what I was thinking we could possibly do. And that's the solution that we go with. And then, then you get in a situation where you're like, wow, we could have fixed this problem a week ago if you had just spoken up and you felt like, you didn't have a voice and you felt like what you were saying wasn't valuable, and clearly that's not true. You came to the same conclusion as someone else. So that's why I think confidence is extremely important, and has helped me a lot once I did realize that. I mean, I know you went through my bio a bit for, some of the things that I proposed, some of the trades that I've done, improvements that I found. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I wasn't confident. I would have been honestly afraid to come up with those solutions and present them to people. And I think it's just really important. I think the other thing about confidence is that what I've dealt with as far as my confidence is almost being a perfectionist to a fault. When you're not confident in your work, you scrutinize it so much more than you really need to. And so, something that now might take me an hour to do probably would have taken me 3 hours when I was first starting out because I was scrutinizing my work. So I think that has been extremely important. It's very important to be confident in yourself, to realize that regardless of your age or your experience, that you are just as valuable as anybody else at that company, and you can bring solutions to that company that will benefit everyone. So I think that's very important. From my point of view, obviously I'm quite biased. I mentioned, that I'm a space nerd. I majored in aerospace engineering in college, but my minor was actually in astronomy. So I took a lot of astronomy classes, took a lot of astrophysics classes. And I think what I'm seeing in this industry that is really exciting, especially from a science perspective, is that we are able to do some of the same science for significantly cheaper. And what that means is we're able to do more of it. So if you think of, some of the most popular, space telescopes like a Hubble or a James Webb, and the cost associated with those programs versus, other programs that are also solving some of these same questions about the universe, the origins of galaxies, how inflation worked after the Big Bang, these really big questions, we're able to do that for pennies on the dollar compared to some of the older programs where, you'd spend 10 years working on a program and by the time you launch it, the technology is already obsolete. I think that is extremely exciting because, in civil space, we really have sort of a limited budget. Our budget comes from the government. And as much as I would like for us to have much more of a cut of that pie, we have to work with what we're given. And so the fact that, even from a launch perspective, that launches are significantly cheaper, that we're moving towards, hosted payloads where, we're just building basically the same satellite bus and, we're just accommodating other payloads because it gets the cost down significantly. I think that we're able to do that and we're moving in that direction means that we get to have several programs, whereas maybe before the cost would be so prohibitive that, we're doing one big program and that's all we can do versus now, I've been working for 6.5 years. I've already worked on 3 different programs that will probably win whoever is doing the science a Nobel Prize because the science is extremely cool and they're essentially doing that science at an extremely cheap cost. And so we can keep just throwing out ideas. What do we want to study? I mean, we've got college kids when I was in college who, are working on CubeSats and you can actually launch those affordably. So it's just the access to space. We have so much more access to it because we've been able to get the price down. I think we're going to see, that a lot of these questions that we have, particularly the ones that I want answered with regards to, the universe and the cosmos, I think we're going to get a lot of those questions answered more quickly because we can put up multiple instruments and do all of that science, much more quickly than, before when it was just prohibitively expensive.